Hello everybody. I really wanted to title this video, Will You Be Ready? Now when I was a teenager, I heard a lot of ministers talk about how we all really need to be ready for when Jesus Christ comes back. And I was really confused and concerned and anxious about this particular question because I actually didn't know what it meant to be ready. And so I had all these questions in my head about, well, yes, I want to be ready for Jesus, but how in the world would I ever make sure to be ready for when Jesus Christ comes back? And so I really wanted to talk about what it is that I've come to, what kind of conclusions I've come up with in regards to this question. And some of it is, once again, a little bit, it might not be as clear cut or, as tangible as some of my other thoughts. This is once again one of those things that everybody really has to decide for themselves. But I really truly believe that Jesus visits his people in quite a few different kinds of ways at quite a few different times. And I really think that we should always be ready for any of those particular things. Now, general readiness would really be about making sure that your heart is free from bitterness, that you have forgiven the people in your life, and that you have as much as possible asked other people to forgive you and tried as much as possible to make sure that nobody else is offended at you in any kind of way, shape, or form. And then, of course, just generally loving people is always a really good thing. However, I also really believe that there is a deeper readiness that any of us should really truly be prepared for. I am going to use what happened in World War II as an example. Now, and this also involves one of the theories that I have in regards to the different parts of our being, how we can have a higher self that's connected to God, and we can also have a lower self that is actually quite creepy. There are parts of ourselves that have very, very bad intentions, that is quite selfish and is animalistic in nature. So, using World War II as an example, we see a culture where it was driven with perfectionism. Germany really, really has a tendency towards perfectionism. And we saw quite a few perfect things come into alignment that really created chaos in Germany. We saw a church that, as much as they are driven with perfectionism rather than grace and mercy, fall into judgment. And so you had a church who basically saw the Jewish people as a problem, and instead of praying grace and mercy on them, they prayed judgment on them. And not only that, but they came up with different kinds of solutions. And one of the solutions that they came up with was that all the rights should be stripped away from the Jewish people during World War II. And what they basically did was they completely stripped the Jewish people of all of their protections in society. And as soon as that happened, and then an authority figure like Hitler came into place and was really interested in basically persecuting somebody, and possibly even particularly the Jews, he found the perfect excuse. We're going to fix society's problems. We're going to become more perfect by ridding us of that which makes us imperfect. And they had decided at the time that that was homosexuals, blacks, the handicapped, and the Jews. And so the race was on to eradicate the Jewish people. Now, in the spirit world, what you can basically say is that the church actually unleashed judgment, God's judgment on the Jewish people. And that it started with the Jewish people, but it ended up with the very Germans themselves that were involved in basically eradicating the problems in society. So they started with the Jews, but in the end, the whole country had the crap bombed out of them and judgment. You know, if you visit Hamburg, you can visit the different places that had been bombed out, and some of those bombings were called Sodom and Gomorrah. So even the Allies who basically took over Germany during World War II saw it as the judgment of God. So it started with the Jews, but it ended with the Germans themselves. But you could say that it brought judgment to the entire world, since it was a world war and the whole world was basically involved and basically beating the crap out of each other. Now, one of the highlights of America has always been God shed his grace on thee, which is a stand against perfectionism. We see that creeping into our culture more and more. But the real beauty, the real glory of America could even be seen in World War II, where we sent our sons, our fathers, our husbands off to Germany to basically beat out Hitler and to really stop the sort of problem. And as soon as the Americans went in, they took over, but then they showed enormous amounts of grace and mercy to the German people. So the people who had just been killing our husbands, fathers, our sons, and so on and so forth, suddenly became objects of the grace and mercy of God when the Americans first showed a fair amount of kindness to the German people. They did quite a lot of good in regards. I'm not saying that they were perfect. I'm sure that there were still soldiers that did a lot of really bad things. But you also had the women in America who heard about the completely desperate famine and the terrible condition that the German people were in after the war. And so they sent care packages to Germany, which is showing God's undeserved, unearned favor, and was really the height of our glory as Americans, in my particular opinion, that we could show so much grace and so much mercy to people that we had previously been at war with. That being said, when God visits his people and when judgment really breaks out, you have to really understand that if we go right back to the beginning, when they were still really going after the Jewish people, you saw in society that all of a sudden it became extremely okay that the Jews were bad people, that they were criminals, and that it was completely okay to steal their stuff, to steal their businesses, to kill, to rape. It didn't matter. The protection was gone. And as soon as the protection was gone, suddenly humanity was stripped away from a good majority of the German people. Now, there were, of course, a few people who were ready for this time of darkness. They were prepared. They saw the lack of justice. They saw the persecution, and they did what they could to help the German people. But that was a very, 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 very small fraction of people. The rest in Germany, unfortunately, gave in to their lower parts, to their more animalistic behavior, that as soon as the law was on their side to persecute and to beat up somebody, a human being who was created in the image of God, and indeed God's ancient people, the Jews, all bets were off, and they basically took for themselves. And so I'm using that as an example of how we can be ready for when Jesus Christ comes. Because really, truly, 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 anytime there is a judgment that breaks out, once again, I bring up right now one of the greatest concerns that I have, which is society's perspective that rich, white, powerful men, or even the police, are somehow the evils of society, and therefore we must really persecute them, and we must really kill them, or we must hurt them, or we must somehow take their power and their rights away, which would set them up to people who are able to function at their lower selves to basically take an advantage and hurting them. So this is a really deep concern of mine. But we see bursts of judgment falling out everywhere, and it starts with one person, but it burns, and it burns every single person who's involved until it burns out and there is no more material to burn. So we see that there is some part of us that really truly needs to always be prepared for any kind of visitations of judgment that can be foolishly released. Usually it's foolishly done. I really believe that judgment sometimes needs to break out, but it should not ever be due to the fact that people need to be better or they need to lose some of their sins. It should really be because society has gotten so judgmental and so cold that they are indeed causing problems. So, but that should always be led by Jesus Christ. It should always be discerned as completely necessary, and it should be done with tremendous care and tremendous consideration, because eventually anybody who releases the judgment of God will also have to face the judgment of God. But as a simple citizen who may not have really considered anything along the lines of what a person deserves or not, they always have to be ready. They have to be ready that if a judgment breaks out, that they understand that that is when their animalistic nature pops out, and that is when the truth of who they are and the very lower parts of their being really emerge. And so anytime you see a person fall into judgment, anytime you see a person being criticized or torn at or mocked or scoffed at, you have to be careful, because if you are functioning in your lower self, you will join in and you will start tearing them down and you will start judging them and you will start persecuting them, in which case the judgment of God will rest on you and you will be burned to a crisp. Because those who judge will always be judged. And the way that you really are ready, in my opinion, in this particular case, is that you are always aware that whatever sin anybody has ever done has been done by countless of other people. And you always have to keep in mind, why does everybody want to sort of string white men up when, black men or women also really, really act corruptly if they get a chance or if they get a possibility. So you always have to keep grace in mind, and you also have to keep lots and lots of different factors in mind. And you do that by giving people the benefit of the doubt, not just believing any accusation you ever hear, by forgiving the people in your life and forgiving yourself. You make sure that you are ready by always judging yourself and really why am I doing that? Why am I attacking this person? Why do I feel such a sense of scorn? Why do I get a feeling of superiority when I can look at the shame and the pain of another human being? So everybody needs to be very, very cautious, because there's times when society and civilization breaks down and what is really going on in your lower depths will be revealed. And Germany is really no different from any other culture. I do believe that the tendency towards perfectionism set them up for what happened in World War II. I believe that the grace that they were able to receive helped set them free. But that sense of perfectionism is always lurking, and so they always have to be a little bit careful. And I also really truly believe that everybody needs to be careful, because when they face up to something like that, their tendency will always be that their animalistic nature takes over. And so that is really my thoughts on how to be ready.